Hi World Watercolor Month gang. Welcome to today's prompt, Fast and Loose. Have you ever played the game Pictionary and looked at the drawing in the end after somebody guessed it almost instantly and just wondered how did you see what I was trying to get across in that awful scrawl? We have amazing brains that can see and identify visual cues to help us understand what we're looking at. And in watercolor, I think it's really fun to take advantage of that in loose painting. And so we're going to talk today, just very briefly, about challenging yourself to paint fast and loose once in a while. Even if you're a realistic painter, this is a great way to get back down to the essence of what you're looking at, to paint in a simpler and more relaxed way, and just have a lot of fun. Let's get started. Today I'm working with Escoda brushes, Hahnemühle watercolor paper, and my beautiful Robax palette. This amazing palette holds oodles of color and is made to be extremely versatile for the studio artist. More information on these supplies, how to order them, and how to enter to win some prizes from these great sponsors on watercolorsummerchallenge.com. Okay, so fast and loose. That is a scary proposition if you're an artist who doesn't have a lot of confidence or if you're used to painting with a lot of control. I think we hear the word fast, and as a watercolor instructor, for many years I would tell students you want to paint fast because watercolor dries quickly. But the problem with that is my students would hear me say fast and they would think rush. And we want to paint quickly, but we do not want to rush. We want to be very intentional about our paintings. So when I'm painting quickly, I'm relaxed, I'm not tense and rushed, and I'm really connected to my painting. I'm focused on what's happening on the paper and being intentional about where I place my brush and what my brush is doing. And some of that comes from experience, having painted for many years, and I can create effortless strokes because I've made those strokes many times before. So that's good news for you, because a cure for inexperience is just to paint a lot. I'm just painting a little leaf shape here. I want to paint some effortless looking flowers today, being fast and loose. Leaf shapes are just wonderful little teardrop shapes. And once you've placed that leaf shape, this is Kingman Green Turquoise, you can dot in additional colors while that color is nice and moist and create even more lovely effects. So I'm dotting in some cobalt teal and some phthalo yellow green. I'm going to pull that green down to create a stem. And so that's really kind of pretty. And so now I have a leaf, and from that leaf is going to grow the entire rest of my painting. We're just going to spend a few minutes today playing with some color. And so let's choose a pretty favorite color, a wonderful wisteria, Daniel Smith's beautiful red violet. And it's a little bit opaque, so it goes a little cloudy in my water over here. And that helps me to know that wisteria is actually one of those colors you can layer over other colors to create, or over darker colors rather, so you get some beautiful interplay of light over dark, which is hard to do in watercolor. So with that wisteria, I just painted myself a pretty little shape. And I varied my values. I used a little bit of, quite a lot of pigment early on, created this irregular shape, used a little more water further in, and left a few white spaces to keep it pretty and fresh. I can then go into my other purple hues. I'm going to grab some cobalt violet deep and maybe just dot a little bit of that in. And while everything's shiny and wet, I get a beautiful flow. So that's awfully pretty. I like the interplay of light and dark when I'm painting because that gives me contrast, and contrast is what tells your viewer, come and look a little closer. So I'm going to create some more contrast right over here with some little dots, and these little marks are going to be little stamens that bring the eye a little bit closer. These flowers are imaginary. They do not have, they could be something. Maybe you're seeing a flower that's familiar to you here, but they're open-ended enough so that anybody who sees it can read into it what they will. A little bit like Pictionary. So now I have a second flower, and that flower has kind of a, I want to say cup shape, or actually it's kind of shaped like a paw, which I think is kind of interesting. It's an interesting shape. It's a little bit unusual. We're going to grab some yellow, and if I'm not sure about what I have in my palette here, I can pop these large pans right out, because I've written, except for on this one, apparently, on the end of the pan what color I'm using, or what color I've placed in there. And we're going to place some yellow into our painting, and I think because we have a kind of a big flower right now, we're going to paint some smaller flowers. And these are easy ones. They're just little brush dabs. And this gives my little arrangement some form. So suddenly your eye is following this stem curving up the painting, and it's going to curve even further right now as I add a little bit of green, phthalo yellow green, some little stem marks to, yeah, just guide the eye through the painting just a little bit more. And maybe a few little leaves here too. And that could make just a very pretty greeting card. I could easily see building a pattern design out of that if you're into that sort of thing. If you're wanting to be a little more botanical in style, you might want to stay closer to your reference books and make sure you get flower shapes that represent the flowers that you love. But if you're like me and sometimes just want to play with your imagination, you can have a lot of fun just letting some colors move in the painting. Now, I think it would be really unfair of us not to use one of the best colors of all time, some Rose of Ultramarine. And for this one, I think trying to figure out how everything's going to build together. We have this beautiful curve this way. We could start curving this way maybe. Let's do it. So we're going to create some maybe bell-shaped flowers coming this direction. And as these bells curve down, they're going to get a little bit smaller and maybe a little bit lighter. Makes sense to me. And I'm going to use a thirsty brush to lift a little color here. This is Rose of Ultramarine. I said it was the world's best color, and then I don't know if I actually said which color I was using. Maybe one more bell over here. And then with that Rose of Ultramarine, I'm actually going to add some ultramarine. Rose of Ultramarine is made from quinacridone rose and ultramarine blue. So if you don't have it, you can mix it. And the thing with Rose of Ultramarine is it separates as it dries. So if you let it into a wash and really let it flow, which I'm not really doing here, thirsty brush again, just getting some of that light and dark value, complexity of color happening. But if you let it flow, you'll see those colors start to separate, and it creates some really beautiful effects. And in this case, we're kind of doing more, like I said, more of the pattern design kind of idea. So we don't have a background to think about, and that's another way to keep things kind of fast and loose and simple. Just abandon your background. And I'm creating some line because I think that might be fun. And since we're moving up, and I'm actually kind of moving off the page, because when you don't have expectations for what you're going to paint, sometimes it takes you in a new direction that you weren't planning. We're going to put another of those wisteria blossoms up here and add in those same colors that we started with. And I think a little cobalt violet, deep. And maybe a little bit of spatter. Oh, that was a lot of spatter, but it's pretty. And then back to our greens again. We want this a stem. We want to show that that's connected. We're working with simple shapes and simple lines. Letting some color bleed and flow is another key to giving that effortless look. And not everything has to be connected to everything else. Sometimes you might just have a few little shapes that are kind of floating off to the side to help balance out your composition. And I think I'm going to do that down here too with some phthalo yellow green. So now we have some mysterious flowers that do not have a Latin designation, because I just invented them. I think the really neat thing about doing a little fast and loose sketch like this is you get to play with composition, arranging your elements of your painting in a pleasing way. Here I was looking for balance, and so when I painted this little arc of flowers, I painted this little swirl of turquoise as well, just to balance it out. Placing a few leaves helps as well. And then the other thing you get to play with is just the beauty of watercolor, dropping color in and letting it flow. It's really neat that as expert Pictionary players, we can allow colors and shapes to flow together a little bit, and people still are going to see flowers and leaves and stems, even though this stem here is creeping into my flower in a way that might make you want to panic and try to control it. And yet it actually adds this really beautiful watercolor texture that's just so fun to look at. And all of the little shapes and dabbles here are just lots of fun. You can do this technique as well on a first layer wet and wet wash. So if you're a person who likes to play with your wet and wet techniques and you've got all these backgrounds that you don't know what to do with, throw some flowers on them. Create some beautiful layers over top, and then chop them up and give them as greeting cards, or just frame them. They're beautiful and simple and elegant just the way they are. I'll be sharing more about my Escoda brushes and how to do some really fun mark making while avoiding the watercolorist curse of overworking on my Watercolor Summer Challenge site today. Make sure you go and take a look at that. Enter to win from my prize sponsors. Then come back here, get set for tomorrow's World Watercolor Month Challenge prompt. We're gonna just paint the world full of beautiful watercolor this July. Thanks for joining me. I'm Angela Fehr.